The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 47. The Council of the Musketeers. As Athos had foreseen, the bastion was only occupied by a dozen corpses, French and Rochellais. "Gentlemen," said Athos, who had assumed the command of the expedition, "while Grimaud spreads the table, let us begin by collecting the guns and cartridges together. We can talk while performing that necessary task. These gentlemen," added he, pointing to the bodies, "cannot hear us." "But we could throw them into the ditch," said Porthos, "after having assured ourselves they have nothing in their pockets." "Yes," said Athos, "that's Grimaud's business." "Well, then," cried D'Artagnan, "pray let Grimaud search them and throw them over the walls." "Heaven forfend," said Athos, "they may serve us." "These bodies serve us," said Porthos. "You are mad, dear friend." "Judge not rashly, says the Gospel and the Cardinal," replied Athos. "How many guns, gentlemen?" 12, replied Aramis. "How many shots?" 100. "That's quite as many as we shall want. Let us load the guns." The four Musketeers went to work, and as they were loading the last musket, Grimaud announced that the breakfast was ready. Athos replied, always by gestures, that was well, and indicated to Grimaud, by pointing to a turret that resembled a pepper caster, that he was to stand as sentinel. Only, to alleviate the tediousness of the duty, Athos allowed him to take a loaf, 2 cutlets, and a bottle of wine. "And now to table," said Athos. The four friends seated themselves on the ground with their legs crossed, like Turks or even tailors. "And now," said D'Artagnan, "as there is no longer any fear of being overheard, I hope you are going to let me into your secret." "I hope at the same time to procure your amusement and glory, gentlemen," said Athos. "I have induced you to take a charming promenade. Here is a delicious breakfast, and yonder are 500 persons, as you may see through the loopholes, taking us for heroes or madmen, 2 classes of imbeciles greatly resembling each other." "But the secret," said D'Artagnan. "The secret is," said Athos, "that I saw Milady last night." D'Artagnan was lifting a glass to his lips, but at the name of Milady his hand trembled so that he was obliged to put the glass on the ground again for fear of spilling the contents. "You saw your wife—" "Hush!" interrupted Athos. "You forget, my dear, you forget that these gentlemen are not initiated into my family affairs like yourself. I have seen Milady." "Where?" demanded D'Artagnan. "Within 2 leagues of this place, at the inn of the Red Dovecot." "In that case I am lost," said D'Artagnan. "Not so bad yet," replied Athos, "for by this time she must have quit the shores of France." D'Artagnan breathed again. "But after all," asked Porthos, "who is Milady?" "A charming woman," said Athos, sipping a glass of sparkling wine. "Villainous host!" cried he. "He has given us Anjou wine instead of champagne, and fancies we know no better." "Yes," continued he, "a charming woman, who entertained kind views toward our friend D'Artagnan, who, on his part, has given her some offense, for which she tried to revenge herself a month ago by having him killed by 2 musket shots, a week ago by trying to poison him, and yesterday by demanding his head of the cardinal." "What! By demanding my head of the cardinal?" cried D'Artagnan, pale with terror. "Yes, that is true as the gospel," said Porthos. "I heard her with my own ears." "I also," said Aramis. "Then," said D'Artagnan, letting his arm fall with discouragement, "it is useless to struggle longer. I may as well blow my brains out, and all will be over." "That's the last folly to be committed," said Athos, "seeing it is the only one for which there is no remedy." "But I can never escape," said D'Artagnan, "with such enemies. First my stranger of Meung, then De Wardes, to whom I have given 3 sword wounds, next Milady, whose secret I have discovered, finally the cardinal, whose vengeance I have balked." "Well," said Athos, "that only makes 4, and we are 4, 1 for 1. Pardieu, if we may believe the signs Grimaud is making, we are about to have to do with a very different number of people. What is it, Grimaud? Considering the gravity of the occasion, I permit you to speak, my friend, but be laconic, I beg. What do you see?" "A troop." "Of how many persons?" 20 men. "What sort of men?" 16 pioneers, 4 soldiers. "How far distant?" 500 paces. "Good. We have just time to finish this fowl, and to drink 1 glass of wine. To your health, D'Artagnan." "To your health," repeated Porthos and Aramis. "Well then, to my health, although I am very much afraid that your good wishes will not be of great service to me." "Bah!" said Athos. "God is great, as say the followers of Mohammed, and the future is in his hands." Then, swallowing the contents of his glass, which he put down close to him, Athos arose carelessly, took the musket next to him, and drew near to one of the loopholes. Porthos, Aramis, and D'Artagnan followed his example. As to Grimaud, he received orders to place himself behind the four friends in order to reload their weapons. "Pardieu," said Athos, "it was hardly worth while to distribute ourselves for 20 fellows armed with pickaxes, mattocks, and shovels. Grimaud had only to make them a sign to go away, and I am convinced they would have left us in peace." "I doubt that," replied D'Artagnan, "for they are advancing very resolutely. Besides, in addition to the pioneers, there are 4 soldiers and a brigadier armed with muskets." "That's because they don't see us," said Athos. "My faith," said Aramis, "I must confess I feel a great repugnance to fire on these poor devils of civilians." "He is a bad priest," said Porthos, "who has pity for heretics." "In truth," said Athos, "Aramis is right. I will warn them." "What the devil are you going to do?" cried D'Artagnan. "You will be shot." But Athos heeded not his advice. Mounting on the breach, with his musket in one hand and his hat in the other, he said, bowing courteously and addressing the soldiers and the pioneers, who, astonished at this apparition, stopped 50 paces from the bastion, "Gentlemen, a few friends and myself are about to breakfast in this bastion. Now you know nothing is more disagreeable than being disturbed when one is at breakfast. We request you, then, if you really have business here, to wait till we have finished our repast, or to come again a short time hence, unless, which would be far better, you form the salutary resolution to quit the sight of the rebels, and come and drink with us to the health of the King of France." "Take care, Athos!" cried D'Artagnan. "Don't you see they are aiming?" "Yes, yes," said Athos, "but they are only civilians, very bad marksmen, who will be sure not to hit me." In fact, at the same instant 4 shots were fired, and the balls were flattened against the wall around Athos, but not one touched him. 4 shots replied to them almost instantaneously, but much better aimed than those of the aggressors. 3 soldiers fell dead, and one of the pioneers was wounded. "Grimaud," said Athos, still on the breach, "another musket." Grimaud immediately obeyed. On their part, the 3 friends had reloaded their arms. A second discharge followed the first. The brigadier and 2 pioneers fell dead. The rest of the troop took to flight. "Now, gentlemen, a sortie!" cried Athos. And the 4 friends rushed out of the fort, gained the field of battle, picked up the 4 muskets of the privates and the half-pike of the brigadier, and convinced that the fugitives would not stop till they reached the city, turned again toward the bastion, bearing with them the trophies of their victory. "Reload the muskets, Grimaud," said Athos, "and we, gentlemen, will go on with our breakfast, and resume our conversation. Where were we?" "I recollect you were saying," said D'Artagnan, "that after having demanded my head of the cardinal, Milady had quit the shores of France. Whither goes she?" added he, strongly interested in the route Milady followed. "She goes into England," said Athos. "With what view?" "With the view of assassinating, or causing to be assassinated, the Duke of Buckingham." D'Artagnan uttered an exclamation of surprise and indignation. "But this is infamous!" cried he. "As to that," said Athos, "I beg you to believe that I care very little about it. Now you have done, Grimaud, take our brigadier's half-pike, tie a napkin to it, and plant it on top of our bastion, that these rebels of Rochelle may see that they have to deal with the brave and loyal soldiers of the king." Grimaud obeyed without replying. An instant afterward, the white flag was floating over the heads of the 4 friends. A thunder of applause saluted its appearance. Half the camp was at the barrier. "How?" replied D'Artagnan. "You care little if she kills Buckingham or causing him to be killed, but the Duke is our friend." "The Duke is English. The Duke fights against us. Let her do what she likes with the Duke. I care no more about him than an empty bottle." And Athos threw 15 paces from him an empty bottle from which he had poured the last drop into his glass. "A moment," said D'Artagnan. "I will not abandon Buckingham thus. He gave us some very fine horses." "And moreover, very handsome saddles," said Porthos, who at the moment wore on his cloak the lace of his own. "Besides," said Aramis, "God desires the conversion and not the death of a sinner." "Amen," said Athos, "and we will return to that subject later, if such be your pleasure. But what for the moment engaged my attention most earnestly, and I am sure you will understand me, D'Artagnan, was the getting from this woman a kind of carte blanche which she had extorted from the cardinal, and by means of which she could with impunity get rid of you, and perhaps of us. "But this creature must be a demon," said Porthos, holding out his plate to Aramis, who was cutting up a fowl. "And this carte blanche," said D'Artagnan, "this carte blanche, does it remain in her hands?" "No, it passed into mine. I will not say without trouble, for if I did I should tell a lie." "My dear Athos, I shall no longer count the number of times I am indebted to you for my life." "Then it was to go to her that you left us," said Aramis. "Exactly." "And you have the letter of the cardinal?" said D'Artagnan. "Here it is," said Athos, and he took the invaluable paper from the pocket of his uniform. D'Artagnan unfolded it with one hand, whose trembling he did not even attempt to conceal, to read. "December 3rd, 1627. It is by my order, and for the good of the state, that the bearer of this has done what he has done. Richelieu." "In fact," said Aramis, "it is an absolution according to rule." "That paper must be torn to pieces," said D'Artagnan, who fancied he read in it his sentence of death. "On the contrary," said Athos, "it must be preserved carefully. I would not give up this paper if covered with as many gold pieces." "And what will she do now?" asked the young man. "Why," replied Athos carelessly, "she is probably going to write to the cardinal that a damned Musketeer named Athos has taken her safe conduct from her by force. She will advise him in the same letter to get rid of his two friends, Aramis and Porthos, at the same time. The cardinal will remember that these are the same men who have often crossed his path, and then some fine morning he will arrest D'Artagnan, and for fear he should feel lonely, he will send us to keep him company in the Bastille." "Go to! It appears to me you make dull jokes, my dear," said Porthos. "I do not jest," said Athos. "Do you know," said Porthos, "that to twist that damned Milady's neck would be a smaller sin than to twist those of these poor devils of Huguenots, who have committed no other crime than singing in French the psalms we sing in Latin." "What says the Abbé?" asked Athos quietly. "I say I am entirely of Porthos's opinion," replied Aramis. "And I too," said D'Artagnan. "Fortunately she is far off," said Porthos, "for I confess she would worry me if she were here." "She worries me in England as well as in France," said Athos. "She worries me everywhere," said D'Artagnan. "But when you held her in your power, why did you not drown her, strangle her, hang her?" said Porthos. "It is only the dead who do not return." "You think so, Porthos?" replied the Musketeer, with a sad smile which D'Artagnan alone understood. "I have an idea," said D'Artagnan. "What is it?" said the Musketeers. "To arms!" said Grimaud. The young men sprang up and seized their muskets. This time a small troop advanced, consisting of from 20 to 25 men, but they were not pioneers, they were soldiers of the garrison. "Shall we return to the camp?" said Porthos. "I don't think the sides are equal." "Impossible, for 3 reasons," replied Athos. "The first, that we have not finished breakfast. The second, that we still have some very important things to say. And the third, that it yet wants 10 minutes before the lapse of the hour." "Well, then," said Aramis, "we must form a plan of battle." "That's very simple," replied Athos. "As soon as the enemy are within musket shot, we must fire upon them. If they continue to advance, we must fire again. We must fire as long as we have loaded guns. If those who remain of the troop persist in coming to the assault, we will allow the besiegers to get as far as the ditch, and then we will push down upon their heads that strip of wall which keeps it perpendicular by a miracle." "Bravo!" cried Porthos. "Decidedly, Athos, you were born to be a general, and the cardinal, who fancies himself a great soldier, is nothing beside you." "Gentlemen," said Athos, "no divided attention, I beg. Let each one pick out his man." "I cover mine," said D'Artagnan. "And I mine," said Porthos. "And I mine," said Aramis. "Fire, then," said Athos. The 4 muskets made but one report, but 4 men fell. The drum immediately beat, and the little troop advanced at charging pace. Then the shots were repeated without regularity, but always aimed with the same accuracy. Nevertheless, as if they had been aware of the numerical weakness of the friends, the Rochellais continued to advance in quick time. With every 3 shots at least 2 men fell, but the march of those who remained was not slackened. Arrived at the foot of the bastion, there were still more than a dozen of the enemy. A last discharge welcomed them, but did not stop them. They jumped into the ditch, and prepared to scale the breach. "Now, my friends," said Athos, "finish them at a blow! To the wall! To the wall!" And the four friends, seconded by Grimaud, pushed with the barrels of their muskets an enormous sheet of the wall, which bent as if pushed by the wind, and detaching itself from its base, fell with a horrible crash into the ditch. Then a fearful crash was heard, a cloud of dust mounted toward the sky, and all was over. "Can we have destroyed them all, from the first to the last?" said Athos. "My faith, it appears so," said D'Artagnan. "No," cried Porthos. "There go 3 or 4 limping away." In fact, 3 or 4 of these unfortunate men, covered with dirt and blood, fled along the hollow way, and at length regained the city. These were all who were left of the little troop. Athos looked at his watch. "Gentlemen," said he, "we have been here an hour, and our wager is won, but we will be fair players. Besides, D'Artagnan has not told us his idea yet." And the Musketeer, with his usual coolness, reseated himself before the remains of the breakfast. "My idea?" said D'Artagnan. "Yes, you said you had an idea," said Athos. "Oh, I remember," said D'Artagnan. "Well, I will go to England a second time. I will go and find Buckingham." "You shall not do that, D'Artagnan," said Athos coolly. "And why not? Have I not been there once?" "Yes, but at that period we were not at war. At that period Buckingham was an ally and not an enemy. What you would now do amounts to treason." D'Artagnan perceived the force of this reasoning and was silent. "But," said Porthos, "I think I have an idea in my turn." "The silence for Monsieur Porthos's idea," said Aramis. "I will ask leave of absence of Monsieur de Tréville on some pretext or other which you must invent. I am not very clever at pretexts. Milady does not know me. I will get access to her without her suspecting me, and when I catch my beauty, I will strangle her." "Well," replied Athos, "I am not far from approving the idea of Monsieur Porthos." "For shame," said Aramis. "Kill a woman? No, listen to me. I have the true idea." "Let us see your idea, Aramis," said Athos, who felt much deference for the young Musketeer. "We must inform the queen." "Ah, my faith, yes," said Porthos and D'Artagnan at the same time. "We are coming nearer to it now." "Inform the queen," said Athos. "And how? Have we relations with the court? Could we send anyone to Paris without its being known in the camp? From here to Paris it is 140 leagues. Before our letter was at Angers, we should be in a dungeon." "As to remitting a letter with safety to her Majesty," said Aramis, coloring, "I will take that upon myself. I know a clever person at Tours." Aramis stopped on seeing Athos smile. "Well, do you not adopt this means, Athos?" said D'Artagnan. "I do not reject it altogether," said Athos. "But I wish to remind Aramis that he cannot quit the camp, and that nobody but one of ourselves is trustworthy. That 2 hours after the messenger has set out, all the Capuchins, all the police, all the black caps of the cardinal will know your letter by heart, and you and your clever person will be arrested." "Without reckoning," objected Porthos, "that the queen would save Monsieur de Buckingham, but would take no heed of us." "Gentlemen," said D'Artagnan, "what Porthos says is full of sense." "Ah, but what's going on in the city yonder?" said Athos. "They are beating the general alarm." The four friends listened, and the sound of the drum plainly reached them. "You see that they are going to send a whole regiment against us," said Athos. "You don't think of holding out against a whole regiment, do you?" said Porthos. "Why not?" said the Musketeer. "I feel myself quite in a humor for it, and I would hold out before an army if we had taken the precaution to bring a dozen more bottles of wine." "Upon my word, the drum draws near," said D'Artagnan. "Let it come," said Athos. "It is a quarter of an hour's journey from here to the city, consequently a quarter of an hour's journey from the city to hither. That is more than time enough for us to devise a plan. If we go from this place, we shall never find another so suitable. Ah, stop! I have it, gentlemen. The right idea has just occurred to me." "Tell us." "Allow me to give Grimaud some indispensable orders." Athos made a sign for his lackey to approach. "Grimaud," said Athos, pointing to the bodies which lay under the wall of the bastion, "take those gentlemen, set them up against the wall, put their hats upon their heads, and their guns in their hands." "Ah, the great man!" cried D'Artagnan. "I comprehend now." "You comprehend?" said Porthos. "And do you comprehend, Grimaud?" said Aramis. Grimaud made a sign in the affirmative. "That's all that is necessary," said Athos. "Now for my idea." "I should like, however, to comprehend," said Porthos. "That is useless." Yes, yes, Athos's idea, cried Aramis and D'Artagnan at the same time. This Milady, this woman, this creature, this demon, has a brother-in-law, as I think you told me, D'Artagnan. Yes, I know him very well, and I also believe that he has not a very warm affection for his sister-in-law. There is no harm in that. If he detested her, it would be all the better, replied Athos. In that case, we are as well off as we wish. And yet, said Porthos, I would like to know what Grimaud is about. Silence, Porthos, said Aramis. What is her brother-in-law's name? Lord de Winter. Where is he now? He returned to London at the first sound of war. Well, there's just the man we want, said Athos. It is he whom we must warn. We will have him informed that his sister-in-law is on the point of having someone assassinated, and beg him not to lose sight of her. There is in London, I hope, some establishment like that of the Magdalene or of the Repentant Daughters. He must place his sister in one of these, and we shall be in peace. Yes, said D'Artagnan, till she comes out. Ah, my faith, says Athos, you require too much, D'Artagnan. I have given you all I have, and I beg leave to tell you that this is the bottom of my sack. But I think it would be still better, said Aramis, to inform the Queen and Lord de Winter at the same time. Yes, but who is to carry the letter to Tours, and who to London? I answer for Bazin, said Aramis. And I for Planchet, said D'Artagnan. Aye, said Porthos, if we cannot leave the camp, our lackeys may. To be sure they may, and this very day we will write the letters, said Aramis. Give the lackeys money, and they will start. We will give them money, replied Athos. Have you any money? The four friends looked at one another, and a cloud came over the brows which but lately had been so cheerful. Look out, cried D'Artagnan. I see black points and red points moving yonder. Why did you talk of a regiment, Athos? It is a veritable army. My faith, yes, said Athos. There they are. See the sneaks come without drum or trumpet. Ah, have you finished, Grimaud? Grimaud made a sign in the affirmative, and pointed to a dozen bodies which he had set up in the most picturesque attitudes. Some carried arms, others seemed to be taking aim, and the remainder appeared merely to be sword in hand. Bravo, said Athos. That does honor to your imagination. All very well, said Porthos, but I should like to understand. Let us decamp first, and you will understand afterward. A moment, gentlemen, a moment. Give Grimaud time to clear away the breakfast. Ah, said Aramis, the black points and the red points are visibly enlarging. I am of D'Artagnan's opinion. We have no time to lose in regaining our camp. My faith, said Athos, I have nothing to say against a retreat. We bet upon 1 hour, and we have stayed an hour and a half. Nothing can be said. Let us be off, gentlemen, let us be off. Grimaud was already ahead, with the basket and the dessert. The four friends followed, 10 paces behind him. What the devil shall we do now, gentlemen? Cried Athos. Have you forgotten anything? Said Aramis. The white flag, morbleu! We must not leave a flag in the hands of the enemy, even if that flag be but a napkin. And Athos ran back to the bastion, mounted the platform, and bore off the flag. But as the Rochellais had arrived within musket range, they opened a terrible fire upon this man, who appeared to expose himself for pleasure's sake. But Athos might be said to bear a charmed life. The balls passed and whistled all around him. Not one struck him. Athos waved his flag, turning his back on the guards of the city, and saluting those of the camp. On both sides loud cries arose, on the one side cries of anger, and on the other cries of enthusiasm. A second discharge followed the first, and 3 balls by passing through it made the napkin really a flag. Cries were heard from the camp, "Come down! Come down!" Athos came down. His friends who anxiously awaited him saw him returned with joy. "Come along, Athos, come along!" cried D'Artagnan. "Now we have found everything except money. It would be stupid to be killed." But Athos continued to march majestically, whatever remarks his companions made, and they, finding their remarks useless, regulated their pace by his. Grimaud and his basket were far in advance, out of the range of the balls. At the end of an instant they heard a furious fusillade. "What's that?" asked Porthos. "What are they firing at now? I hear no balls whistle, and I see nobody." "They are firing at the corpses," replied Athos. "But the dead cannot return their fire." "Certainly not. They will then fancy it is an ambuscade. They will deliberate, and by the time they have found out the pleasantry, we shall be out of the range of their balls. That renders it useless to get a pleurisy by too much haste." "Oh, I comprehend now," said the astonished Porthos. "That's lucky," said Athos, shrugging his shoulders. On their part, the French, on seeing the four friends return at such a step, uttered cries of enthusiasm. At length a fresh discharge was heard, and this time the balls came rattling among the stones around the four friends, and whistling sharply in their ears. The Rochellais had at last taken possession of the bastion. "These Rochellais are bungling fellows," said Athos. "How many have we killed of them? A dozen? Or 15? How many did we crush under the wall? 8 or 10. And in exchange for all that, not even a scratch. Oh, but what is the matter with your hand, D'Artagnan? It bleeds, seemingly." "Oh, it's nothing," said D'Artagnan. "A spent ball?" "Not even that." "What is it, then?" We have said that Athos loved D'Artagnan like a child, and this somber and inflexible personage felt the anxiety of a parent for the young man. "Only grazed a little," replied D'Artagnan. "My fingers were caught between 2 stones, that of the wall and that of my ring, and the skin was broken." "That comes of wearing diamonds, my master," said Athos disdainfully. "Ah, to be sure," cried Porthos, "there is a diamond. Why the devil, then, do we plague ourselves about money when there is a diamond?" "Stop a bit," said Aramis. "Well thought of, Porthos. This time you have an idea." "Undoubtedly," said Porthos, drawing himself up at Athos's compliment. "As there is a diamond, let us sell it." "But," said D'Artagnan, "it is the queen's diamond." "The stronger reason why it should be sold," replied Athos. "The queen saving Monsieur de Buckingham, her lover, nothing more just. The queen saving us, her friends, nothing more moral. Let us sell the diamond. What says Monsieur the Abbé? I don't ask Porthos, his opinion has been given." "Why, I think," said Aramis, blushing as usual, "that his ring not coming from a mistress, and consequently not being a love token, D'Artagnan may sell it." "My dear Aramis, you speak like theology personified. Your advice, then, is—" "To sell the diamond," replied Aramis. "Well, then," said D'Artagnan gaily, "let us sell the diamond and say no more about it." The fusillade continued, but the four friends were out of reach, and the Rochellais only fired to appease their consciences. "My faith, it was time that idea came into Porthos's head. Here we are at the camp. Therefore, gentlemen, not a word more of this affair. We are observed. They are coming to meet us. We shall be carried in triumph." In fact, as we have said, the whole camp was in motion. More than 2,000 persons had assisted, as at a spectacle, in this fortunate but wild undertaking of the four friends, an undertaking of which they were far from suspecting the real motive. Nothing was heard but cries of, "Live the Musketeers! Live the Guards!" Monsieur de Busigny was the first to come and shake Athos by the hand, and acknowledge that the wager was lost. The dragoon and the Swiss followed him, and all their comrades followed the dragoon and the Swiss. There was nothing but felicitations, pressures of the hand, and embraces. There was no end to the inextinguishable laughter at the Rochellais. The tumult at length became so great that the cardinal fancied there must be some riot, and sent La Houdinière, his captain of the guards, to inquire what was going on. The affair was described to the messenger with all the effervescence of enthusiasm. "Well?" asked the cardinal, on seeing La Houdinière return. "Well, monseigneur," replied the latter, "Three Musketeers and a guardsman laid a wager with Monsieur de Busigny that they would go and breakfast in the bastion Saint-Gervais. While breakfasting, they held it for 2 hours against the enemy, and have killed I don't know how many Rochellais." "Did you inquire the names of those 3 Musketeers?" "Yes, monseigneur." "What are their names?" "Messieurs Athos, Porthos, and Aramis." "Still my 3 brave fellows," murmured the cardinal. "And the guardsman?" "D'Artagnan." "Still my young scapegrace. Positively, these 4 men must be on my side." The same evening the cardinal spoke to Monsieur de Tréville of the exploit of the morning, which was the talk of the whole camp. Monsieur de Tréville, who had received the account of the adventure from the mouths of the heroes of it, related it in all its details to his Eminence, not forgetting the episode of the napkin. "That's well, Monsieur de Tréville," said the cardinal. "Pray let that napkin be sent to me. I will have 3 fleurs-de-lis embroidered on it in gold, and I will give it to your company as a standard." "Monseigneur," said Monsieur de Tréville, "that would be unjust to the guardsmen. Monsieur d'Artagnan is not with me. He serves under Monsieur Dessessart." "Well, then, take him," said the cardinal. "When 4 men are so much attached to one another, it is only fair that they should serve in the same company." That same evening Monsieur de Tréville announced this good news to the 3 Musketeers and D'Artagnan, inviting all 4 to breakfast with him next morning. D'Artagnan was beside himself with joy. We know that the dream of his life had been to become a Musketeer. The 3 friends were likewise greatly delighted. "My faith," said D'Artagnan to Athos, "you had a triumphant idea. As you said, we have acquired glory, and we're enabled to carry on a conversation of the highest importance, which we can resume now without anybody suspecting us, for, with the help of God, we shall henceforth pass for cardinalists." That evening D'Artagnan went to present his respect to Monsieur Dessessart and inform him of his promotion. Monsieur Dessessart, who esteemed D'Artagnan, made him offers of help, as this change would entail expenses for equipment. D'Artagnan refused, but thinking the opportunity a good one, he begged him to have the diamond he put into his hand valued, as he wished to turn it into money. The next day Monsieur Dessessart's valet came to D'Artagnan's lodging and gave him a bag containing 7,000 livres. This was the price of the Queen's diamond. End of chapter 47.
The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 48. A Family Affair. Athos had invented the phrase, family affair. A family affair was not subject to the investigation of the cardinal. A family affair concerned nobody. People might employ themselves in a family affair before all the world. Therefore Athos had invented the phrase, family affair. Aramis had discovered the idea, the lackeys. Porthos had discovered the means, the diamond. D'Artagnan alone had discovered nothing. He, ordinarily the most inventive of the four, but it must be also said that the very name of Milady paralyzed him. Ah, no, we were mistaken. He had discovered a purchaser for his diamond. The breakfast at Monsieur de Tréville's was as gay and cheerful as possible. D'Artagnan already wore his uniform, for being nearly of the same size as Aramis, and as Aramis was so liberally paid by the publisher who purchased his poem as to allow him to buy everything double, he sold his friend a complete outfit. D'Artagnan would have been at the height of his wishes if he had not constantly seen Milady like a dark cloud hovering in the horizon. After breakfast it was agreed that they should meet again in the evening at Athos's lodging and there finish their plans. D'Artagnan passed the day in exhibiting his musketeer's uniform in every street of the camp. In the evening, at the appointed hour, the four friends met. There only remained three things to decide: what they should write to Milady's brother, what they should write to the clever person at Tours, and which should be the lackeys to carry the letters. Everyone offered his own. Athos talked of the discretion of Grimaud, who never spoke a word but when his master unlocked his mouth. Porthos boasted of the strength of Mousqueton, who was big enough to thrash 4 men of ordinary size. Aramis, confiding in the address of Bazin, made a pompous eulogium on his candidate. Finally, D'Artagnan had entire faith in the bravery of Planchet, and reminded them of the manner in which he had conducted himself in the ticklish affair of Boulogne. These four virtues disputed the prize for a length of time and gave birth to magnificent speeches which we do not repeat here, for fear they should be deemed too long. "Unfortunately," said Athos, "he whom we send must possess in himself alone the 4 qualities united." "But where is such a lackey to be found?" "Not to be found," cried Athos. "I know it well. So take Grimaud. Take Mousqueton. Take Bazin. Take Planchet. Planchet is brave and shrewd. They are 2 qualities out of the 4. "Gentlemen," said Aramis, "the principal question is not to know which of our 4 lackeys is the most discreet, the most strong, the most clever, or the most brave. The principal thing is to know which loves money the best." "What Aramis says is very sensible," replied Athos. "We must speculate upon the faults of people, and not upon their virtues. Monsieur Abbé, you are a great moralist." "Doubtless," said Aramis, "for we not only require to be well served in order to succeed, but moreover not to fail, for in case of failure heads are in question. Not for our lackeys." "Speak lower, Aramis," said Athos. "That's wise, not for the lackeys," resumed Aramis, "but for the master. For the masters, we may say. Are our lackeys sufficiently devoted to us to risk their lives for us? No. My faith, said D'Artagnan, I would almost answer for Planchet. Well, my dear friend, add to his natural devotedness a good sum of money, and then, instead of answering for him once, answer for him twice. Why, good God, you will be deceived just the same, said Athos, who was an optimist when things were concerned and a pessimist when men were in question. They will promise everything for the sake of the money, and on the road fear will prevent them from acting. Once taken, they will be pressed. When pressed, they will confess everything. What the devil! We are not children. To reach England, Athos lowered his voice, all France, covered with spies and creatures of the cardinal, must be crossed. A passport for embarkation must be obtained, and the party must be acquainted with English in order to ask the way to London. Really, I think the thing very difficult. Not at all, cried D'Artagnan, who was anxious the matter should be accomplished. On the contrary, I think it very easy. It would be, no doubt, parbleu, if we write to Lord de Winter about affairs of vast importance, of the horrors of the cardinal. Speak lower, said Athos. Of intrigues and secrets of state, continued D'Artagnan, complying with the recommendation. There can be no doubt we would all be broken on the wheel. But for God's sake do not forget, as you yourself said, Athos, that we only write to him concerning a family affair, that we only write to him to entreat that as soon as Milady arrives in London he will put it out of her power to injure us. I will write to him then nearly in these terms. Let us see, said Athos, assuming in advance a critical look. Monsieur and dear friend. Ah, yes, dear friend to an Englishman, interrupted Athos. Well commenced. Bravo, D'Artagnan. Only with that word you would be quartered instead of being broken on the wheel. Well, perhaps. I will say then, monsieur, quite short. You may even say, my lord, replied Athos, who stickled for propriety. My lord, do you remember the little goat pasture of the Luxembourg? Good, the Luxembourg. One might believe this is an allusion to the Queen Mother. That's ingenious, said Athos. Well, then, we will put simply, my lord, do you remember a certain little enclosure where your life was spared? My dear D'Artagnan, you will never make anything but a very bad secretary. Where your life was spared. For shame! That's unworthy. A man of spirit is not to be reminded of such services. A benefit reproached is an offense committed. The devil, said D'Artagnan, you are insupportable. If the letter must be written under your censure, my faith, I renounce the task. And you will do right. Handle the musket and the sword, my dear fellow. You will come off splendidly at those two exercises, but pass the pen over to Monsieur Abbé. That's his province. Aye, aye, said Porthos. Pass the pen to Aramis, who writes theses in Latin. Well, so be it, said D'Artagnan. Draw up this note for us, Aramis, but by our holy father the Pope, cut it short, for I shall prune you in my turn, I warn you. I ask no better, said Aramis, with that ingenious air of confidence which every poet has in himself. But let me be properly acquainted with the subject. I have heard here and there that this sister-in-law was a hussy. I have obtained proof of it by listening to her conversation with the cardinal. Lower! Sacre bleu! said Athos. But, continued Aramis, the details escape me. And me also, said Porthos. D'Artagnan and Athos looked at each other for some time in silence. At length, Athos, after serious reflection and becoming more pale than usual, made a sign of assent to D'Artagnan, who by it understood he was at liberty to speak. Well, this is what you have to say, said D'Artagnan. My lord, your sister-in-law is an infamous woman, who wished to have you killed that she might inherit your wealth. But she could not marry your brother, being already married in France, and having been— D'Artagnan stopped, as if seeking for the word, and looked at Athos. Repudiated by her husband, said Athos. Because she had been branded, continued D'Artagnan. Bah! cried Porthos. Impossible! What do you say, that she wanted to have her brother-in-law killed? Yes. She was married? asked Aramis. Yes. And her husband found out that she had a fleur-de-lis on her shoulder? cried Porthos. Yes. These three yeses had been pronounced by Athos, each with a sadder intonation. "And who has seen this fleur-de-lis?" inquired Aramis. "D'Artagnan and I, or rather, to observe the chronological order, I and D'Artagnan," replied Athos. "And does the husband of this frightful creature still live?" said Aramis. "He still lives." "Are you quite sure of it?" "I am he." There was a moment of cold silence during which everyone was affected according to his nature. "This time," said Athos, first breaking the silence, "D'Artagnan has given us an excellent program, and the letter must be written at once." "The devil! You are right, Athos," said Aramis, "and it is a rather difficult matter. The Chancellor himself would be puzzled how to write such a letter, and yet the Chancellor draws up an official report very readily. Never mind, be silent. I will write." Aramis accordingly took the quill, reflected for a few moments, wrote 8 or 10 lines in a charming little female hand, and then with a voice soft and low, as if each word had been scrupulously weighed, he read the following: "My lord, the person who writes these few lines had the honor of crossing swords with you in the little enclosure of the Rue d'Enfer. As you have several times since declared yourself the friend of that person, he thinks it his duty to respond to that friendship by sending you important information. Twice you have nearly been the victim of a near relative, whom you believe to be your heir, because you are ignorant that before she contracted a marriage in England she was already married in France. But the third time, which is the present, you may succumb. Your relative left La Rochelle for England during the night. Watch her arrival, for she has great and terrible projects. If you require to know positively what she is capable of, read her past history on her left shoulder." "Well, now that will do wonderfully well," said Athos. "My dear Aramis, you have the pen of a Secretary of State. Lord de Winter will now be upon his guard if the letter should reach him, and even if it should fall into the hands of the cardinal, we shall not be compromised. But as the lackey who goes may make us believe he has been to London, and may stop at Châtellerault, let us give him only half the sum promised him with the letter, with an agreement that he shall have the other half in exchange for the reply. Have you the diamond?" continued Athos. "I have what is still better. I have the price." And D'Artagnan threw the bag upon the table. At the sound of the gold, Aramis raised his eyes, and Porthos started. As to Athos, he remained unmoved. "How much in that little bag?" 7,000 livres, in louis of 12 francs. 7,000 livres! cried Porthos. "That poor little diamond was worth 7,000 livres?" "It appears so," said Athos, "since here they are. I don't suppose that our friend D'Artagnan has added any of his own to the amount." "But, gentlemen, in all this," said D'Artagnan, "we do not think of the queen. Let us take some heed of the welfare of her dear Buckingham. That is the least we owe her." "That's true," said Athos, "but that concerns Aramis." "Well," replied the latter, blushing, "what must I say?" "Oh, that's simple enough," replied Athos. "Write a second letter for that clever personage who lives at Tours." Aramis resumed his pen, reflected a little, and wrote the following lines, which he immediately submitted to the approbation of his friends. "My dear cousin." "Aha!" said Athos. "This clever person is your relative, then?" "Cousin german." "Go on, to your cousin, then." Aramis continued. "My dear cousin, His Eminence the Cardinal, whom God preserve for the happiness of France and the confusion of the enemies of the kingdom, is on the point of putting an end to the hectic rebellion of La Rochelle. It is probable that the succor of the English fleet will never even arrive in sight of the place. I will even venture to say that I am certain Monsieur de Buckingham will be prevented from setting out by some great event. His Eminence is the most illustrious politician of times past, of times present, and probably of times to come. He would extinguish the sun if the sun incommoded him. Give these happy tidings to your sister, my dear cousin. I have dreamed that the unlucky Englishman was dead. I cannot recollect whether it was by steel or by poison. Only of this I am sure, I have dreamed he was dead, and you know my dreams never deceive me. Be assured, then, of seeing me soon return." "Capital!" cried Athos. "You are the king of poets, my dear Aramis. You speak like the Apocalypse, and you are as true as the Gospel. There is nothing now to do but to put the address to this letter." "That is easily done," said Aramis. He folded the letter fancifully, and took up his pen and wrote, "To Mademoiselle Michon, seamstress, Tours." The three friends looked at one another and laughed. They were caught. "Now," said Aramis, "you will please to understand, gentlemen, that Bazin alone can carry this letter to Tours. My cousin knows nobody but Bazin, and places confidence in nobody but him. Any other person would fail. Besides, Bazin is ambitious and learned. Bazin has read history, gentlemen. He knows that Sixtus V became pope after having kept pigs. Well, as he means to enter the church at the same time as myself, he does not despair of becoming pope in his turn, or at least a cardinal. You can understand that a man who has such views will never allow himself to be taken, or if taken, will undergo martyrdom rather than speak." "Very well," said D'Artagnan, "I consent to Bazin with all my heart, but grant me Planchet." Milady had him one day turned out of doors with sundry blows of a good stick to accelerate his motions. Now Planchet has an excellent memory, and I will be bound that sooner than relinquish any possible means of vengeance he will allow himself to be beaten to death. If your arrangements at Tours are your arrangements, Aramis, those of London are mine. I request, then, that Planchet may be chosen, more particularly as he has already been to London with me and knows how to speak correctly. London, sir, if you please, and my master, Lord D'Artagnan. With that you may be satisfied he can make his way, both going and returning." "In that case," said Athos, "Planchet must receive 700 livres for going, and 700 livres for coming back, and Bazin 300 livres for going, and 300 livres for returning. That will reduce the sum to 5,000 livres. We will each take 1,000 livres to be employed as seems goods, and we will leave a fund of 1,000 livres under the guardianship of Monsieur Abbé here for extraordinary occasions or common wants. Will that do?" "My dear Athos," said Aramis, "you speak like Nestor, who was, as everyone knows, the wisest among the Greeks." "Well, then," said Athos, "it is agreed. Planchet and Bazin shall go. Everything considered, I am not sorry to retain Grimaud. He is accustomed to my ways, and I am particular. Yesterday's affair must have shaken him a little. His voyage would upset him quite." Planchet was sent for, and instructions were given him. The matter had been named to him by D'Artagnan, who in the first place pointed out the money to him, then the glory, and then the danger. "I will carry the letter in the lining of my coat," said Planchet, "and if I am taken, I will swallow it." "Well, but then you will not be able to fulfill your commission," said D'Artagnan. "You will give me a copy this evening, which I shall know by heart tomorrow." D'Artagnan looked at his friends as if to say, "Well, what did I tell you?" "Now," continued he, addressing Planchet, "you have 8 days to get an interview with Lord de Winter. You have 8 days to return, in all 16 days. If, on the 16th day after your departure, at 8 o'clock in the evening, you are not here, no money, even if it be 5 minutes past 8. Then, monsieur," said Planchet, "you must buy me a watch." "Take this," said Athos, with his usual careless generosity, giving him his own, "and be a good lad. Remember, if you talk, if you babble, if you get drunk, you risk your master's head, who has so much confidence in your fidelity and who answers for you. But remember also that if by your fault any evil happens to D'Artagnan, I will find you, wherever you may be, for the purpose of ripping up your belly." "Oh, monsieur," said Planchet, humiliated by the suspicion, and moreover terrified at the calm air of the Musketeer. "And I," said Porthos, rolling his large eyes, "remember, I will skin you alive." "Ah, monsieur!" "And I," said Aramis, with his soft, melodious voice, "remember that I will roast you at a slow fire, like a savage." "Ah, monsieur!" Planchet began to weep. We will not venture to say whether it was from terror created by the threats, or from tenderness at seeing 4 friends so closely united. D'Artagnan took his hand. "See, Planchet," said he, "these gentlemen only say this out of affection for me, but at bottom they all like you." "Ah, monsieur," said Planchet, "I will succeed, or I will consent to be cut in quarters, and if they do cut me in quarters, be assured that not a morsel of me will speak." It was decided that Planchet should set out the next day, at 8 o'clock in the morning, in order, as he had said, that he might during the night learn the letter by heart. He gained just 12 hours by this engagement. He was to be back on the 16th day by 8 o'clock in the evening. In the morning, as he was mounting his horse, D'Artagnan, who felt at the bottom of his heart a partiality for the Duke, took Planchet aside. "Listen," he said to him, "when you have given the letter to Lord de Winter, and he has read it, you will further say to him, 'Watch over his Grace Lord Buckingham, for they wish to assassinate him.' But this, Planchet, is so serious and important that I have not informed my friends that I would entrust this secret to you, and for a captain's commission I would not write it." "Be satisfied, monsieur," said Planchet. "You shall see if confidence can be placed in me." Mounted on an excellent horse, which he was to leave at the end of 20 leagues in order to take the post, Planchet set off at a gallop, his spirits a little depressed by the triple promise made him by the Musketeers, but otherwise as light-hearted as possible. Bazin set out the next day for Tours, and was allowed 8 days for performing his commission. The four friends, during the period of these two absences, had, as may well be supposed, the eye on the watch, the nose to the wind, and the ear on the hark. Their days were passed in endeavouring to catch all that was said, in observing the proceeding of the cardinal, and in looking out for all the couriers who arrived. More than once an involuntary trembling seized them when called upon for some unexpected service. They had, besides, to look constantly to their own proper safety. Milady was a phantom which, when it had once appeared to people, did not allow them to sleep very quietly. On the morning of the 8th day, Bazin, fresh as ever, and smiling, according to custom, entered the cabaret of the Parpaillots as the four friends were sitting down to breakfast, saying, as had been agreed upon, "Monsieur Aramis, the answer from your cousin." The four friends exchanged a joyful glance. Half of the work was done. It is true, however, that it was the shorter and easier part. Aramis, blushing in spite of himself, took the letter, which was in a large, coarse hand, and not particular for its orthography. "Good God!" cried he, laughing, "I quite despair of my poor Michon. She will never write like Monsieur de Voiture." "What does you mean by poor Michon?" said the Swiss, who was chatting with the four friends when the letter came. "Oh, pardieu, less than nothing," said Aramis, "a charming little seamstress, whom I love dearly, and from whose hand I requested a few lines as a sort of keepsake." "The devil!" said the Swiss. "If she is as great a lady as her writing is large, you are a lucky fellow, comrade." Aramis read the letter and passed it to Athos. "See what she writes to me, Athos," said he. Athos cast a glance over the epistle, and to disperse all the suspicions that might have been created, read aloud, "My cousin, my sister and I are skillful in interpreting dreams, and even entertain great fear of them. But of yours it may be said, I hope, every dream is an illusion. Adieu. Take care of yourself, and act so that we may from time to time hear you spoken of. Marie Michon." "And what dream does she mean?" asked the dragoon, who had approached during the reading. "Yes, what's the dream?" said the Swiss. "Well, pardieu," said Aramis, "it was only this. I had a dream, and I related it to her." "Yes, yes," said the Swiss, "it's simple enough to tell a dream, but I never dream." "You are very fortunate," said Athos, rising. "I wish I could say as much." "Never," replied the Swiss, enchanted that a man like Athos could envy him anything. "Never, never." D'Artagnan, seeing Athos rise, did likewise, took his arm, and went out. Porthos and Aramis remained behind to encounter the jokes of the dragoon and the Swiss. As to Bazin, he went and lay down on a truss of straw, and as he had more imagination than the Swiss, he dreamed that Aramis, having become pope, adorned his head with the cardinal's hat. But as we have said, Bazin had not, by his fortunate return, removed more than a part of the uneasiness which weighed upon the four friends. The days of expectations are long, and D'Artagnan in particular would have wagered that the days were 44 hours. He forgot the necessary slowness of navigation. He exaggerated to himself the power of Milady. He credited this woman, who appeared to him the equal of a demon, with agents as supernatural as herself. At the least noise he imagined himself about to be arrested, and that Planchet was being brought back to be confronted with himself and his friends. Still further, his confidence in the worthy Picard, at one time so great, diminished day by day. This anxiety became so great that it even extended to Aramis and Porthos. Porthos alone remained unmoved, as if no danger hovered over him, and as if he breathed his customary atmosphere. On the 16th day in particular these signs were so strong in D'Artagnan and his two friends that they could not remain quiet in one place, and wandered about like ghosts on the road by which Planchet was expected. "Really," said Athos to them, "you are not men but children, to let a woman terrify you so. And what does it amount to, after all? To be imprisoned. Well, but we should be taken out of prison. Madame Bonacieux was released. To be decapitated? Why, every day in the trenches we go cheerfully to expose ourselves to worse than that, for a bullet may break a leg, and I am convinced a surgeon would give us more pain in cutting off a thigh than an executioner in cutting off a head. Wait quietly, then. In 2 hours, in 4, in 6 hours at the latest, Planchet will be here. He promised to be here, and I have very great faith in Planchet, who appears to me to be a very good lad." "But if he does not come?" said D'Artagnan. "Well, if he does not come, it will be because he has been delayed, that's all. He may have fallen from his horse, he may have cut a caper from the deck, he may have traveled so fast against the wind as to have brought on a violent catarrh. Ah, gentlemen, let us reckon upon accidents. Life is a chaplet of little miseries which the philosopher counts with a smile. Be philosophers, as I am, gentlemen. Sit down at a table and let us drink. Nothing makes the future look so bright as surveying it through a glass of Chambertin." "That's all very well," replied D'Artagnan, "but I am tired of fearing when I open a fresh bottle that the wine may come from the cellar of Milady." "You are very fastidious," said Athos. "Such a beautiful woman." "A woman of mark," said Porthos, with his loud laugh. Athos started, passed his hand over his brow to remove the drops of perspiration that burst forth, and rose in his turn with a nervous movement he could not repress. The day, however, passed away, and the evening came on slowly, but finally it came. The bars were filled with drinkers. Athos, who had pocketed his share of the diamond, seldom quit the Parpaillot. He had found in Monsieur de Busigny, who, by the way, had given them a magnificent dinner, a partner worthy of his company. They were playing together as usual when 7 o'clock sounded. The patrol was heard passing to double the posts. At 7:30 the retreat was sounded. "We are lost," said D'Artagnan in the ear of Athos. "You mean to say we have lost," said Athos, quietly, drawing 4 pistoles from his pocket and throwing them upon the table. "Come, gentlemen," said he, "they are beating the tattoo. Let us to bed." And Athos went out of the Parpaillot, followed by D'Artagnan. Aramis came behind, giving his arm to Porthos. Aramis mumbled verses to himself, and Porthos from time to time pulled a hair or two from his mustache, in sign of despair. But all at once a shadow appeared in the darkness, the outline of which was familiar to D'Artagnan, and a well-known voice said, "Monsieur, I have brought your cloak. It is chilly this evening." "Planchet!" cried D'Artagnan, beside himself with joy. "Planchet!" repeated Aramis and Porthos. "Well, yes, Planchet, to be sure," said Athos. "What is there so astonishing in that? He promised to be back by 8 o'clock, and 8 is striking." "Bravo, Planchet! You are a lad of your word, and if ever you leave your master, I will promise you a place in my service." "Oh, no, never," said Planchet. "I will never leave Monsieur d'Artagnan." At the same time D'Artagnan felt that Planchet slipped a note into his hand. D'Artagnan felt a strong inclination to embrace Planchet as he had embraced him on his departure, but he feared lest this mark of affection bestowed upon his lackey in the open street might appear extraordinary to passers-by, and he restrained himself. "I have the note," said he to Athos and to his friends. "That's well," said Athos. "Let us go home and read it." The note burned the hand of D'Artagnan. He wished to hasten their steps, but Athos took his arm and passed it under his own, and the young man was forced to regulate his pace by that of his friend. At length they reached the tent, lit a lamp, and while Planchet stood at the entrance, that the 4 friends might not be surprised, D'Artagnan with a trembling hand broke the seal and opened the so anxiously expected letter. It contained half a line, in a hand perfectly British, and with a conciseness as perfectly Spartan: "Thank you. Be easy." D'Artagnan translated this for the others. Athos took the letter from the hands of D'Artagnan, approached the lamp, set fire to the paper, and did not let go till it was reduced to a cinder. Then, calling Planchet, he said, "Now, my lad, you may claim your 700 livres, but you did not run much risk with such a note as that." "Am I not to blame for having tried every means to compress it?" said Planchet. "Well," cried D'Artagnan, "tell us all about it." "Dame, that's a long job, monsieur." "You are right, Planchet," said Athos. "Besides, the tattoo has been sounded, and we should be observed if we kept a light burning much longer than the others." "So be it," said D'Artagnan. "Go to bed, Planchet, and sleep soundly." "My faith, monsieur, that will be the first time I have done so for 16 days." "And me too," said D'Artagnan. "And me too," said Porthos. "And me too," said Aramis. "Well, if you will have the truth, and me too," said Athos. End of chapter 48.
The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 49. Fatality. Meantime Milady, drunk with passion, roaring on the deck like a lioness that has been embarked, had been tempted to throw herself into the sea that she might regain the coast, for she could not get rid of the thought that she had been insulted by D'Artagnan, threatened by Athos, and that she had quit France without being revenged on them. This idea soon became so insupportable to her that at the risk of whatever terrible consequences might result to herself from it, she implored the captain to put her on shore. But the captain, eager to escape from his false position, placed between French and English cruisers, like the bat between the mice and the birds, was in great haste to regain England, and positively refused to obey what he took for a woman's caprice, promising his passenger, who had been particularly recommended to him by the cardinal, to land her, if the sea and the French permitted him, at one of the ports of Brittany, either at Lorient or Brest. But the wind was contrary, the sea bad. They tacked and kept off shore. 9 days after leaving the Charente, pale with fatigue and vexation, Milady saw only the blue coasts of Finistère appear. She calculated that to cross this corner of France and return to the cardinal it would take her at least 3 days. Add another day for landing, and that would make 4. Add these 4 to the 9 others, that would be 13 days lost. 13 days during which so many important events might pass in London. She reflected likewise that the cardinal would be furious at her return, and consequently would be more disposed to listen to the complaints brought against her than to the accusations she brought against others. She allowed the vessel to pass Lorient and Brest without repeating her request to the captain, who, on his part, took care not to remind her of it. Milady therefore continued her voyage, and on the very day that Planchet embarked at Portsmouth for France, the messenger of his Eminence entered the port in triumph. All the city was agitated by an extraordinary movement. 4 large vessels, recently built, had just been launched. At the end of the jetty, his clothes richly laced with gold, glittering, as was customary with him, with diamonds and precious stones, his hat ornamented with a white feather, which drooped upon his shoulder, Buckingham was seen surrounded by a staff almost as brilliant as himself. It was one of those rare and beautiful days in winter when England remembers that there is a sun. The star of day, pale but nevertheless still splendid, was setting in the horizon, glorifying at once the heavens and the sea with bands of fire, and casting upon the towers and the old houses of the city a last ray of gold, which made the windows sparkle like the reflection of a conflagration. Breathing that sea breeze, so much more invigorating and balsamic as the land is approached, contemplating all the power of those preparations she was commissioned to destroy, all the power of that army which she was to combat alone, she, a woman, with a few bags of gold, Milady compared herself mentally to Judith, the terrible Jewess, when she penetrated the camp of the Assyrians and beheld the enormous mass of chariots, horses, men, and arms which a gesture of her hand was to dissipate like a cloud of smoke. They entered the roadstead, but as they drew near in order to cast anchor, a little cutter, looking like a coast-guard, formidably armed, approached the merchant vessel and dropped into the sea a boat which directed its course to the latter. This boat contained an officer, a mate, and 8 rowers. The officer alone went on board, where he was received with all the deference inspired by the uniform. The officer conversed a few instants with the captain, gave him several papers of which he was the bearer to read, and upon the order of the merchant captain, the whole crew of the vessel, both passengers and sailors, were called upon deck. When this species of summons was made, the officer inquired aloud the point of the brig's departure, its route, its landings, and to all these questions the captain replied without difficulty and without hesitation. Then the officer began to pass in review all the people, one after the other, and stopping when he came to Milady, surveyed her very closely, but without addressing a single word to her. He then returned to the captain, said a few words to him, and as if from that moment the vessel was under his command, he ordered a maneuver which the crew executed immediately. Then the vessel resumed its course, still escorted by the little cutter, which sailed side by side with it, menacing it with the mouths of its 6 cannon. The boat followed in the wake of the ship, a speck near the enormous mass. During the examination of Milady by the officer, as may well be imagined, Milady on her part was not less scrutinizing in her glances. But however great was the power of this woman with eyes of flame in reading the hearts of those whose secrets she wished to divine, she met this time with a countenance of such impassivity that no discovery followed her investigation. The officer who had stopped in front of her and studied her with so much care might have been 25 or 26 years of age. He was of pale complexion, with clear blue eyes, rather deeply set. His mouth, fine and well cut, remained motionless in its correct lines. His chin, strongly marked, denoted that strength of will which in the ordinary Britannic type denotes mostly nothing but obstinacy. A brow a little receding, as is proper for poets, enthusiasts, and soldiers, was scarcely shaded by short, thin hair, which, like the beard which covered the lower part of his face, was of a beautiful, deep chestnut color. When they entered the port, it was already night. The fog increased the darkness, and formed round the stern lights and lanterns of the jetty a circle like that which surrounds the moon when the weather threatens to become rainy. The air they breathed was heavy, damp, and cold. Milady, that woman so courageous and firm, shivered in spite of herself. The officer desired to have Milady's packages pointed out to him, and ordered them to be placed in the boat. When this operation was complete, he invited her to descend by offering her his hand. Milady looked at this man and hesitated. "Who are you, sir?" asked she. "Who has the kindness to trouble yourself so particularly on my account?" "You may perceive, madam, by my uniform, that I am an officer in the English navy," replied the young man. "But is it the custom for the officers in the English navy to place themselves at the service of their female compatriots when they land in a port of Great Britain, and carry their gallantry so far as to conduct them ashore?" "Yes, madame, it is the custom, not from gallantry but prudence, that in time of war foreigners should be conducted to particular hotels, in order that they may remain under the eye of the government until full information can be obtained about them. These words were pronounced with the most exact politeness and the most perfect calmness. Nevertheless, they had not the power of convincing Milady. "But I am not a foreigner, sir," said she, with an accent as pure as ever was heard between Portsmouth and Manchester. "My name is Lady Cleric, and this measure—" "This measure is general, madame, and you will seek in vain to evade it." "I will follow you, then, sir." Accepting the hand of the officer, she began the descent of the ladder, at the foot of which the boat waited. The officer followed her. A large cloak was spread at the stern. The officer requested her to sit down upon this cloak, and placed himself beside her. "Row," said he to the sailors. The 8 oars fell at once into the sea, making but a single sound, giving but a single stroke, and the boat seemed to fly over the surface of the water. In 5 minutes they gained the land. The officer leaped to the pier and offered his hand to Milady. A carriage was in waiting. "Is this carriage for us?" asked Milady. "Yes, madame," replied the officer. "The hotel, then, is far away?" "At the other end of the town." "Very well," said Milady, and she resolutely entered the carriage. The officer saw that the baggage was fastened carefully behind the carriage, and this operation ended, he took his place beside Milady and shut the door. Immediately, without any order being given or his place of destination indicated, the coachman set off at a rapid pace and plunged into the streets of the city. So strange a reception naturally gave Milady ample matter for reflection. So, seeing that the young officer did not seem at all disposed for conversation, she reclined in her corner of the carriage, and one after the other passed in review all the surmises which presented themselves to her mind. At the end of a quarter of an hour, however, surprised at the length of the journey, she leaned forward toward the door to see whither she was being conducted. Houses were no longer to be seen. Trees appeared in the darkness like great black phantoms chasing one another. Milady shuddered. "But we are no longer in the city, sir," said she. The young officer preserved silence. "I beg you to understand, sir, I will go no farther unless you tell me whither you are taking me." This threat brought no reply. "Oh, this is too much!" cried Milady. "Help! Help!" No voice replied to hers. The carriage continued to roll on with rapidity. The officer seemed a statue. Milady looked at the officer with one of those terrible expressions peculiar to her countenance, and which so rarely failed of their effect. Anger made her eyes flash in the darkness. The young man remained immovable. Milady tried to open the door in order to throw herself out. "Take care, madam," said the young man coolly. "You will kill yourself in jumping." Milady reseated herself, foaming. The officer leaned forward, looked at her in his turn, and appeared surprised to see that face, just before so beautiful, distorted with passion, and almost hideous. The artful creature at once comprehended that she was injuring herself by allowing him thus to read her soul. She collected her features, and in a complaining voice said, "In the name of heaven, sir, tell me if it is to you, if it is to your government, if it is to an enemy I am to attribute the violence that is done me." "No violence will be offered to you, madame, and what happens to you is the result of a very simple measure which we are obliged to adopt with all who land in England." "Then you don't know me, sir?" "It is the first time I have had the honor of seeing you." "And on your honor, you have no cause of hatred against me?" "None, I swear to you." There was so much serenity, coolness, mildness even, in the voice of the young man, that Milady felt reassured. At length, after a journey of nearly an hour, the carriage stopped before an iron gate, which closed an avenue leading to a castle, severe in form, massive and isolated. Then, as the wheels rolled over a fine gravel, Milady could hear a vast roaring, which she at once recognized as the noise of the sea dashing against some steep cliff. The carriage passed under 2 arched gateways, and at length stopped in a court large, dark, and square. Almost immediately the door of the carriage was opened. The young man sprang lightly out, and presented his hand to Milady, who leaned upon it, and in her turn alighted with tolerable calmness. "Still, then, I am a prisoner?" said Milady, looking around her, and bringing back her eyes with a most gracious smile to the young officer. "But I feel assured it will not be for long," added she. "My own conscience and your politeness, sir, are the guarantees of that." However flattering this compliment, the officer made no reply, but drawing from his belt a little silver whistle, such as boatswains use in ships of war, he whistled 3 times, with 3 different modulations. Immediately several men appeared, who unharnessed the smoking horses and put the carriage into a coach-house. Then the officer, with the same calm politeness, invited his prisoner to enter the house. She, with a still smiling countenance, took his arm, and passed with him under a low arched door, which by a vaulted passage, lighted only at the farther end, led to a stone staircase around an angle of stone. They then came to a massive door, which after the introduction into the lock of a key which the young man carried with him, turned heavily upon its hinges, and disclosed the chamber destined for Milady. With a single glance the prisoner took in the apartment in its minutest details. It was a chamber whose furniture was at once appropriate for a prisoner or a free man, and yet bars at the windows and outside bolts at the door decided the question in favor of the prison. In an instant all the strength of mind of this creature, though drawn from the most vigorous sources, abandoned her. She sank into a large easy-chair, with her arms crossed, her head lowered, and expecting every instant to see a judge enter to interrogate her. But no one entered, except 2 or 3 marines, who brought her trunks and packages, deposited them in a corner, and retired without speaking. The officer superintended all these details with the same calmness Milady had constantly seen in him, never pronouncing a word himself, and making himself obeyed by a gesture of his hand or a sound of his whistle. It might have been said that between this man and his inferiors spoken language did not exist, or had become useless. At length Milady could hold out no longer. She broke the silence. "In the name of heaven, sir," cried she, "what means all that is passing? Put an end to my doubts. I have courage enough for any danger I can foresee, for every misfortune which I understand. Where am I, and why am I here? If I am free, why these bars and these doors? If I am a prisoner, what crime have I committed?" "You are here in the apartment destined for you, madame. I received orders to go and take charge of you on the sea, and to conduct you to this castle. This order, I believe, I have accomplished with all the exactness of a soldier, but also with the courtesy of a gentleman. There terminates, at least to the present moment, the duty I had to fulfill toward you. The rest concerns another person." "And who is that other person?" asked Milady warmly. "Can you not tell me his name?" At the moment a great jingling of spurs was heard on the stairs. Some voices passed and faded away, and the sound of a single footstep approached the door. "That person is here, madame," said the officer, leaving the entrance open, and drawing himself up in an attitude of respect. At the same time the door opened. A man appeared on the threshold. He was without a hat, carried a sword, and flourished a handkerchief in his hand. Milady thought she recognized this shadow in the gloom. She supported herself with one hand upon the arm of the chair, and advanced her head as if to meet a certainty. The stranger advanced slowly, and as he advanced, after entering into the circle of light projected by the lamp, Milady involuntarily drew back. Then, when she had no longer any doubt, she cried in a state of stupor, "What? My brother? Is it you?" "Yes, fair lady," replied Lord de Winter, making a bow, half courteous, half ironical. "It is I, myself." "But this castle, then?" "Is mine." "This chamber?" "Is yours." "I am, then, your prisoner?" "Nearly so." "But this is a frightful abuse of power." "No high-sounding words. Let us sit down and chat quietly, as brother and sister ought to do." Then, turning toward the door, and seeing that the young officer was waiting for his last orders, he said, "All is well. I thank you. Now leave us alone, Mr. Felton." End of chapter 49. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 50. Chat between brother and sister. During the time which Lord de Winter took to shut the door, close a shutter, and draw a chair near to his sister-in-law's fauteuil, Milady, anxiously thoughtful, plunged her glance into the depths of possibility, and discovered all the plan, of which she could not even obtain a glance as long as she was ignorant into whose hands she had fallen. She knew her brother-in-law to be a worthy gentleman, a bold hunter, an intrepid player, enterprising with women, but by no means remarkable for his skill in intrigues. How had he discovered her arrival, and caused her to be seized? Why did he detain her? Athos had dropped some words which proved that the conversation she had with the cardinal had fallen into outside ears, but she could not suppose that he had dug a countermine so promptly and so boldly. She rather feared that her preceding operations in England might have been discovered. Buckingham might have guessed that it was she who had cut off the 2 studs, and avenged himself for that little treachery. But Buckingham was incapable of going to any excess against a woman, particularly if that woman was supposed to have acted from a feeling of jealousy. This supposition appeared to her most reasonable. It seemed to her that they wanted to revenge the past, and not to anticipate the future. At all events, she congratulated herself upon having fallen into the hands of her brother-in-law, with whom she reckoned she could deal very easily, rather than into the hands of an acknowledged and intelligent enemy. "Yes, let us chat, brother," said she, with a kind of cheerfulness, decided as she was to draw from the conversation, in spite of all the dissimulation Lord de Winter could bring, the revelations of which she stood in need to regulate her future conduct. "You have, then, decided to come to England again," said Lord de Winter, "in spite of the resolutions you so often expressed in Paris never to set your feet on British ground?" Milady replied to this question by another question. "To begin with, tell me," said she, "how have you watched me so closely as to be aware beforehand, not only of my arrival, but even of the day, the hour, and the port at which I should arrive?" Lord de Winter adopted the same tactics as Milady, thinking that as his sister-in-law employed them, they must be the best. "But tell me, my dear sister," replied he, "what makes you come to England?" "I come to see you," replied Milady, without knowing how much she aggravated by this reply the suspicions to which D'Artagnan's letter had given birth in the mind of her brother-in-law, and only desiring to gain the good-will of her auditor by a falsehood. "Ah, to see me?" said de Winter, cunningly. "To be sure, to see you. What is there astonishing in that?" And you had no other object in coming to England but to see me?" "No." "So it was for me alone you have taken the trouble to cross the Channel?" "The deuce! What tenderness, my sister!" "But am I not your nearest relative?" demanded Milady, with a tone of the most touching ingenuousness. "And my only heir, are you not?" said Lord de Winter in his turn, fixing his eyes on those of Milady. Whatever command she had over herself, Milady could not help starting, and as in pronouncing the last words Lord de Winter placed his hand upon the arm of his sister, this start did not escape him. In fact, the blow was direct and severe. The first idea that occurred to Milady's mind was that she had been betrayed by Kitty, and that she had recounted to the Baron the selfish aversion toward himself of which she had imprudently allowed some marks to escape before her servant. She also recollected the furious and imprudent attack she had made upon D'Artagnan when he spared the life of her brother. "I do not understand, my lord," said she, in order to gain time and make her adversary speak out. "What do you mean to say? Is there any secret meeting concealed beneath your words?" "Oh, my God, no!" said Lord de Winter with apparent good nature. "You wish to see me, and you come to England. I learn this desire, or rather I suspect that you feel it, and in order to spare you all the annoyances of a nocturnal arrival in a port and all the fatigues of landing, I send one of my officers to meet you. I place a carriage at his orders, and he brings you hither to this castle, of which I am governor, whither I come every day, and where, in order to satisfy our mutual desire of seeing each other, I have prepared you a chamber. What is there more astonishing in all that I have said to you than in what you have told me?" "No, what I think astonishing is that you should expect my coming." "And yet that is the most simple thing in the world, my dear sister. Have you not observed that the captain of your little vessel, on entering the roadstead, sent forward, in order to obtain permission to enter the port, a little boat bearing his logbook and the register of his voyagers? I am commandant of the port. They brought me that book. I recognized your name in it. My heart told me what your mouth has just confirmed, that is to say, with what view you have exposed yourself to the dangers of a sea so perilous, or at least so troublesome at this moment, and I sent my cutter to meet you. You know the rest." Milady knew that Lord de Winter lied, and she was the more alarmed. "My brother," continued she, "was not that my Lord Buckingham, whom I saw on the jetty this evening when we arrived?" "Himself." "Ah, I can understand how the sight of him struck you," replied Lord de Winter. "You came from a country where he must be very much talked of, and I know that his armaments against France greatly engage the attention of your friend the cardinal." "My friend the cardinal!" cried Milady, seeing that on this point, as on the other, Lord de Winter seemed well instructed. "Is he not your friend?" replied the baron negligently. "Ah, pardon, I thought so. But we will return to my Lord Duke presently. Let us not depart from the sentimental turn our conversation has taken. You came, you say, to see me?" "Yes." "Well, I reply that you shall be served to the height of your wishes, and that we shall see each other every day." "Am I, then, to remain here eternally?" demanded Milady, with a certain terror. "Do you find yourself badly lodged, sister? Demand anything you want, and I will hasten to have you furnished with it." "But I have neither my women nor my servants." "You shall have all, madame. Tell me on what footing your household was established by your first husband, and although I am only your brother-in-law, I will arrange one similar." "My first husband!" cried Milady, looking at Lord de Winter with eyes almost starting from their sockets. "Yes, your French husband. I don't speak of my brother. If you have forgotten, as he is still living, I can write to him, and he will send me information on the subject." A cold sweat burst from the brow of Milady. "You jest," said she in a hollow voice. "Do I look so?" asked the Baron, rising and going a step backward. "Or rather you insult me," continued she, pressing with her stiffened hands the two arms of her easy-chair, and raising herself upon her wrists. "I insult you?" said Lord de Winter with contempt. "In truth, madame, do you think that can be possible?" "Indeed, sir," said Milady, "you must be either drunk or mad. Leave the room and send me a woman." "Women are very indiscreet, my sister. Cannot I serve you as a waiting-maid? By that means all our secrets will remain in the family." "Insolent!" cried Milady. As if acted upon by a spring, she bounded toward the Baron, who awaited her attack with his arms crossed, but nevertheless with one hand on the hilt of his sword. "Come," said he, "I know you are accustomed to assassinate people, but I warn you I shall defend myself, even against you." "You are right," said Milady. "You have all the appearance of being cowardly enough to lift your hand against a woman." "Perhaps so, and I have an excuse, for mine would not be the first hand of a man that has been placed upon you, I imagine." And the Baron pointed with a slow and accusing gesture to the left shoulder of Milady, which he almost touched with his finger. Milady uttered a deep inward shriek, and retreated to a corner of the room like a panther which crouches for a spring. "Oh, growl as much as you please," cried Lord de Winter, "but don't try to bite, for I warn you that it would be to your disadvantage. There are here no procurators who regulate successions beforehand. There is no knight-errant to come and seek a quarrel with me on account of the fair lady I detain a prisoner. But I have judges quite ready who will quickly dispose of a woman so shameless as to glide, a bigamist, into the bed of Lord de Winter, my brother. And these judges, I warn you, will soon send you to an executioner, who will make both your shoulders alike." The eyes of Milady darted such flashes that although he was a man and armed before an unarmed woman, he felt the chill of fear glide through his whole frame. However, he continued all the same, but with increasing warmth. "Yes, I can very well understand that after having inherited the fortune of my brother, it would be very agreeable to you to be my heir likewise. But know beforehand, if you kill me or cause me to be killed, my precautions are taken. Not a penny of what I possess will pass into your hands. Were you not already rich enough, you who possess nearly $1 million? And could you not stop your fatal career, if you did not do evil for the infinite and supreme joy of doing it? Oh, be assured, if the memory of my brother were not sacred to me, you should rot in a state dungeon, or satisfy the curiosity of sailors at Tyburn. I will be silent, but you must endure your captivity quietly. In 15 or 20 days I shall set out for La Rochelle with the army. But on the eve of my departure, a vessel which I shall see depart will take you hence, and convey you to our colonies in the south. And be assured that you shall be accompanied by one who will blow your brains out at the first attempt you make to return to England or the Continent." Milady listened with an attention that dilated her inflamed eyes. "Yes, at present," continued Lord de Winter, "you will remain in this castle. The walls are thick, the doors strong, and the bars solid. Besides, your window opens immediately over the sea. The men of my crew, who are devoted to me for life and death, mount guard around this apartment, and watch all the passages that lead to the courtyard. Even if you gained the yard, there would still be 3 iron gates for you to pass. The order is positive. A step, a gesture, a word on your part, denoting an effort to escape, and you are to be fired upon. If they kill you, English justice will be under an obligation to me for having saved it trouble. Ah, I see your features regain their calmness. Your countenance recovers its assurance. You are saying to yourself, 15 days, 20 days, bah! I have an inventive mind. Before that is expired, some idea will occur to me. I have an infernal spirit. I shall meet with a victim. Before 15 days are gone by, I shall be away from here. Ah, try it." Milady, finding her thoughts betrayed, dug her nails into her flesh to subdue every emotion that might give to her face any expression except agony. Lord de Winter continued, "The officer who commands here in my absence you have already seen, and therefore know him. He knows how, as you must have observed, to obey an order, for you did not, I am sure, come from Portsmouth hither without endeavoring to make him speak. What do you say of him? Could a statue of marble have been more impassive and more mute? You have already tried the power of your seductions upon many men, and unfortunately you have always succeeded. But I give you leave to try them upon this one. Pardieu! If you succeed with him, I pronounce you the demon himself." He went toward the door and opened it hastily. "Call Mr. Felton," said he. "Wait a minute longer, and I will introduce him to you." There followed between these two personages a strange silence, during which the sound of a slow and regular step was heard approaching. Shortly a human form appeared in the shade of the corridor, and the young lieutenant, with whom we are already acquainted, stopped at the threshold to receive the orders of the baron. "Come in, my dear John," said Lord de Winter. "Come in and shut the door." The young officer entered. "Now," said the baron, "look at this woman. She is young, she is beautiful, she possesses all earthly seductions. Well, she is a monster who, at 25 years of age, has been guilty of as many crimes as you could read of in a year in the archives of our tribunals. Her voice prejudices her hearers in her favor. Her beauty serves as a bait to her victims. Her body even pays what she promises. I must do her that justice. She will try to seduce you. Perhaps she will try to kill you. I have extricated you from misery, Felton. I have caused you to be named lieutenant. I once saved your life, you know on what occasion. I am for you not only a protector, but a friend; not only a benefactor, but a father. This woman has come back again into England for the purpose of conspiring against my life. I hold this serpent in my hands. Well, I call you and say to you, friend Felton, John, my child, guard me, and more particularly guard yourself, against this woman. Swear by your hopes of salvation to keep her safely for the chastisement she has merited. John Felton, I trust your word. John Felton, I put faith in your loyalty." "My lord," said the young officer, summoning to his mild countenance all the hatred he could find in his heart, "my lord, I swear all shall be done as you desire." Milady received this look like a resigned victim. It was impossible to imagine a more submissive or a more mild expression than that which prevailed on her beautiful countenance. Lord de Winter himself could scarcely recognize the tigress who a minute before prepared apparently for a fight. "She is not to leave this chamber, understand, John?" continued the baron. "She is to correspond with nobody. She is to speak to no one but you. If you will do her the honor to address a word to her—" "That is sufficient, my lord. I have sworn. And now, madame, try to make your peace with God, for you are judged by men." Milady let her head sink, as if crushed by this sentence. Lord de Winter went out, making a sign to Felton, who followed him, shutting the door after him. One instant after, The heavy step of a marine who served as sentinel was heard in the corridor, his axe in his girdle and his musket on his shoulder. Milady remained for some minutes in the same position, for she thought they might perhaps be examining her through the keyhole. She then slowly raised her head, which had resumed its formidable expression of menace and defiance, ran to the door to listen, looked out of her window, and returning to bury herself again in her large armchair, she reflected. End of chapter 50.